Hey, what's going on out there? I'm Sean Devine. Hope you all are doing well. Today I've got a new tutorial where we're going to talk about metering. We got a couple of different standards, different metering types that many of you have questions about, particularly this new standard that's been implemented into a lot of our digital music platforms, streaming platforms. It's called LUFS. Now, you're probably familiar with the older metering, which is RMS, and that's one that I use a lot on the channel. I still use it. It's still very useful, but LUFS has become more of the new standard. So we're going to talk about both of these. We're going to talk about what RMS and LUFS actually mean, what they're measuring, and then which one you should use. So also, don't forget about True Peak. True Peak is another very important metering tool. This is just measuring the loudest point, the peak in your mix or master of your song, and it takes into account the translation from the digital world to the analog world. So it's going to be true peak versus just a peak reading, and that's going to keep you from clipping or distorting on the bus. So let's jump in and let's first talk about what RMS and LUFS actually stand for. RMS is root mean square, and LUFS is loudness units full scale. So you don't have to memorize that. It's not that important, but if you were curious about what the initials stand for, that's that. But first, let's talk about RMS briefly. I'm going to press play, and if you want to just keep an eye on our RMS reading over here, and then we'll talk about what's actually being measured. All right, so we've got a reading over here of -8 RMS. I want to point out also that the level meter, which is this one that's measuring true peak and RMS, and our loudness meter, which is measuring LUFS, are the last plug-in in our stereo bus or our master bus after our limiting and mastering processing, which is in this case ozone. So this is measuring the absolute level after all this stuff is happening and what the actual loudness and level is going to be when it leaves the DAW. So just pointing that out, make sure and put those last if you're measuring it in this way. But let's go back over here, and we've got the -8 RMS. So what RMS is it's measuring level, but it's measuring a short-term average. So whereas the true peak is just going to measure the absolute loudest point in the signal, RMS is taking into account a short-term measurement, and it's averaging that together. So it's a little bit more accurate, and it's going to give you a little bit more of a perceived loudness sort of measurement, although we're still talking about strictly level and not loudness, which we're about to get to here in LUFS. So LUFS is a newer standard that has been being used in the broadcast, television, film world. It's something that we had to follow much more closely when I was working in a post-production facility. When we were delivering our projects, they had to be within a certain LUFS range or have an integrated LUFS figure that matched the standard. So now, in the music world, we've been without a quote standard for level and loudness, and that is slowly changing because they have been wanting to have more consistency after we started getting into the loudness wars where everybody was just trying to make their music super, super loud. The streaming platforms, the digital platforms have said, oh, whoa, that's enough. We need a standard. And so they've adopted the LUFS. And there are some integrated LUFS numbers now. You hear stuff like Spotify, their integrated LUFS standard is -14. All right, so what is the LU in LUFS? What's a loudness unit? All you need to remember is that it is the equivalent of 1 decibel. LUFS is measuring perceived loudness. So it's different than the decibels that are being read by RMS. So let's talk about the difference between LUFS and RMS. So whereas RMS is only measuring that short-term average of level, LUFS is measuring many different things here, and it's doing it in a way that is measuring perceived loudness. So our ears hear loudness in certain ways because frequencies can actually be perceived louder than others. For instance, mid frequencies tend to jump out of speakers and they tend to present themselves more obviously to the human ear. So LUFS takes that sort of thing into account. And then we have some different measurements here. So if you look up here, I'm going to press play again and just keep an eye on this M, the S, the I, then the LU range, and then the I again. This is the same reading that's up there. It's called integrated. Okay, so let's talk about what those we're measuring up here. The M stands for momentary, which is just at that very moment, what is the LUFS reading at that point. So that's going to be closer to our RMS reading. They are going to differ a little bit, but then the S is short term. So that's going to be more of a short term measurement, and it averages those together. The LU range is just referring to the difference in the quietest points of the signal that's being fed in here and the loudest point, and it's referring to it in terms of an LU or a loudness unit. And then the I is integrated. So the integrated is taking into account the loudness over the entire span of us, playing or feeding the signal through it. So when I press play and stop, that entire segment is being taken into account to calculate the integrated LUFS. So the integrated is the one that you're seeing as the standard for music because it's measuring the entire song's integrated LUFS. So if you see -14, that is referring to the integrated in terms of Spotify's standard. So that's the one that you want to focus on. So what should you use? Should you use True Peak, RMS, or LUFS? My personal suggestion is a combination of all three. So RMS, it's not as accurate in terms of perceived loudness, obviously, and I think it's very important that you do want to start getting comfortable. I'm using LUFS a lot more because it's becoming the standard. So I need to be aware of where I want to deliver my sessions for clients in terms of the integrated LUFS, especially to the digital platforms. So that's very important for using in your overall mix and masters, LUFS. But then RMS is still very useful for just judging, signal levels of, say, your microphone, or maybe you want to, measure the loudness of your monitors. It's just something that I'm very comfortable with. I think a lot of engineers, we've been using it for so long that I can just look up and see an RMS number and I know kind of what I'm going for. And it's just a very quick reference point for level. True Peak, very important because we don't want to clip or distort our master bus or go above 0 with True Peak because some of the platforms will actually penalize you. We're going to talk more about that. But in this video, I really just wanted to point out how to use these metering tools, what they mean, what they stand for, and then what the difference is, just generally speaking, between RMS and LUFS. So be sure to stay tuned for the next video. We're going to talk more in depth about how to deliver your music with a target LUFS and RMS that's going to work well on the digital platforms and streaming services. If you have any questions or comments about True Peak, RMS, or LUFS, or the differences between these, feel free to leave a comment below. If you learned anything in the video, please like, subscribe, and consider sharing, and we'll talk to you soon.